So, after experimenting with crayon drawing graphics, 3D environments, and motion controls, Kirby finally found his way back to his portable home on the all-new Game Boy Advance. As a system, this was a big deal for Nintendo because it marked the first massive upgrade to the Game Boy hardware since its original launch. Yeah, the Game Boy Color added a few new features like more colors, an IR sensor, and better battery life, but the GBA was a completely different beast. Faster processor, wider screen, full 32-bit color, and more buttons for more complex gameplay. So what did Nintendo do for our Pink Star Warrior to mark this monumental new leap forward in technology? Remake a game from 10 years ago. Yeah, I'm just gonna say it, I really don't see the purpose of Kirby Nightmare in Dreamland. Video game remakes are not really a new concept, even back in the early 2000s, but, well, let me explain. Metroid Zero Mission, I can understand the need for a remake. Metroid was a very unpolished game with a lot of repetitive architecture and annoying power-up farming. Final Fantasy was held together with duct tape and prayers and just barely f***ing worked. In the decade and a half since these games first came out, there had been a lot of innovations even within their own series that necessitated an upgrade to the original game. But Nightmare in Dreamland is a remake of Kirby's Adventure for the NES. What was wrong with that game? As NES games go, I would argue that Kirby's Adventure is one of the few that's aged extremely well and is still worth playing in its original form even today. In terms of technical complexity and game design, this was actually pretty close to other games in the series, with concepts like the hub overworld and secret areas, but lacks any additional features like animal friends, star pickups for extra lives, or even the multiple attacks per power of Superstar. And Nightmare in Dreamland keeps the same bare-bones design concept. Honestly, when you compare this to earlier games in the series, this actually feels like a step backward. Dreamland 3 and Crystal Shards offered so much replay value and bonus content to reward players who want to go for 100%. There was a reason to revisit earlier stages after you've gained experience as a player or want to explore more thoroughly. But here, the levels are just sort of there. You blaze through them without really thinking about it. I mean, it's fun, but it doesn't seem to offer anything of any real value because it's something we've already seen before. For the most part, the levels are virtually identical to their appearance in Adventure, just altered slightly to fit the new screen layout. Even the same hidden areas and Easter eggs are still here, like the 30 lives trick during the bonus round. Some parts are even less visually creative than the NES original. Remember that section of Butter Building where you run around the outside of the tower until you get to the door? Here, it's just a single screen with a door that opens up after a certain amount of time. Oh wow, way to push the limits of the hardware, Hal. There are a few changes. In addition to the brighter and more varied color palette, all the sprites got a makeover, and Kirby's animation is some of the most lively and bouncy I've seen for a sprite-based game. He now wears hats for all his powers, and the mini-bosses are freaking huge. Rolling Turtle has been replaced with a giant elephant named Fan Fan, but he follows the exact same attack pattern and still drops the throw ability. Some of the powers are also slightly modified. Backdrop now has a diving tackle similar to how it works in Superstar, and Wheel can drive over water. Needle has even been buffed a bit, meaning you can kill enemies underneath you, but some seem to have gotten a notable downgrade, which means it's time to update our entries for the best and worst powers of the game. As I was playing through this game, I was rather pleasantly surprised that many of the more frustrating powers are much easier to use. Sword seems to be more reliable when using it in the air, and Beam even deals fairly decent damage against enemies and bosses. But my choice for the best this time around is Freeze. If you know how to use it, this power just wrecks everything. The only downside is that it's a bit tough to use against the Meta Knights, but even fighting normal mini-bosses this way adds an extra layer of creativity that really makes it fun. As for the worst, well, at first I was leaning toward Laser since it's quite slow and narrow, but then I discovered that it does really well against mini-bosses and Meta Knights, so in a complete reversal of fortune, I'm going with Cutter. I loved it in Adventure, but it is absolutely awful here. The sprite is huge, which means it collides with scenery way more often than the enemies, and it has a longer cooldown, so you can only have one or two out at once. It also doesn't have a lot of range, and there's no way to attack above or below you. But really, these changes just make me wish there was a more unique game associated with them. There was a reason to play Zero Mission even if you loved the original Metroid. New bosses, a redesigned map with better flow, and a completely new section of the game that adds to the overall lore. I kept hoping Nightmare in Dreamland would do something similar, maybe giving the player an extra set of stages after the Fountain of Dreams, but no, it just ends there and unlocks Extra Mode. All of the minigames have been replaced with new ones: Quick Draw, Bomb Rally, and Air Grind. Quick Draw works the same as before, but it's been redesigned to take visual inspiration from Samurai Kirby. Bomb Rally is honestly really boring compared to the original. Air Grind is pretty fun, but I can't help think they're using this as a way to test the waters for a more complex racing game in the very near future. The only other thing that's been added to the game that might actually make it worthwhile is 4-player multiplayer, and a mode where you play as Meta Knight. And if there's any one feature that would make this game a must-play, it would be Meta Nightmare. You're given the task of playing through the entire game in one sitting as Meta Knight, with a running clock keeping time even if you pause. I can see people getting very competitive and trying to go for the fastest time against their friends. In fact, there is an online leaderboard for this. I think personally I would have rather seen this sort of effort put into a new Kirby game that simply borrows ideas and mechanics from Kirby's Adventure, but creates a new story and levels to go with it. Kirby's biggest strength has always been adaptation. He's defined by the way he changes and evolves, but the games up until this point have usually felt like they brought at least something new to the table. I just don't get that same feeling from this. And it's not like the games have gotten so far removed from what they originally stood for that they needed to get back to their roots. This is just retreading old ground. Now, that's not to say Nightmare in Dreamland is bad, it's just Kirby's Adventure again, and I really liked Kirby's Adventure. So if you're put off by the 8-bit graphics or just want something you can play on the go, then Nightmare in Dreamland may be the right choice. As for me though, I was just left hoping to see something new for Kirby, and it seems like I'll be waiting a little bit longer.